How is your succession plan going? If you have a construction company, I know you've given some thought to it at least. And the challenge that many construction companies have is that succession planning often fails. And the question I ask Dan Darchuck, my guest on today's episode of Construction Genius, is why do succession plans fail? Dan is an expert in succession planning, having helped construction companies successfully through the process. His company, Top Turn Capital, delivers innovative financial and investment strategies to business owners. And you'll find our conversation today extremely helpful. And it'll give you a number of different insights into how you can structure a succession plan that will actually give you both the financial and the emotional payback that you're looking for from your business. Feel free to share this interview with other people. Thank you for listening to Construction Genius. Give us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts, and enjoy my conversation today with Dan. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Dan, thank you for joining me. Let me ask you, why do succession plans for construction companies fail?
Well, that's a great question. And first of all, Eric, let me say thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here with the Construction Genius.
Well, I'm not the genius. The listeners are the genius. I'm just hoping to provide a little bit of inspiration to them here.
Well, we'll see if we can help with that. So your question as to why succession plans fail, and it's interesting that you bring that up because I just heard a statistic last week that sellers in general, not specifically construction companies necessarily, but sellers of businesses in general, once the transaction has taken place, once the transition is done, over 50% of those people are dissatisfied. And that is both a compelling statistic, and it is also something that I've seen play out in the course of my business over the years. I've seen that time and time again. And I would say the number one reason probably comes back to what Stephen R. Covey said in his great book, The 7 Habits, and everyone's familiar with that book, published a number of years ago.
Yep.
In a portion of that book, he said, and I'm just paraphrasing, but he said, many people climb the ladder of success only to find, after reaching the top, that ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. And I would use that as an analogy to why succession plans and transition structures fail. The primary reason is likely that you can spend as much time as you want on that thing, rung by rung. If you've got that ladder leaning on the wrong wall or pointed in the wrong direction, if it's not really tied in to what's most important to you and you've missed that somehow, the rest of it's not going to matter.
Okay, so let's explore that for a minute. Tell me, in terms of a succession plan, what does it look like when someone has leaned the ladder against the wrong wall?
Well, I think if anyone were to ask me what's the first step in putting a plan like this together, I would say, number one, you've got to get up to the 10,000 foot elevation and you've got to figure out what it is that's most important to you, first and foremost. And there are a number of other reasons they fail, that could be tied to economies, that could be tied to other financial aspects. I'll add, too, that there are ways to help mitigate all of those different types of possible intrusions into a plan. But the first thing you got to do, Eric, is you've got to go up to that high-level outlook and figure out what out of all of this is most important to me as the owner.
So let me ask you about that then. In your experience working with companies, helping them through succession plans, what are some examples of the reasons why that people have?
Well, that's a great question. And I've kind of distilled it down to 5, 6, 7 different things that are important. Now, some of these may be important to everyone. Some of them might be more important to others and so on.
Sure.
I would say one of the things that's very, very important to owners is often they will want to have continuity.
Okay.
They've worked for many years. You know, the flash in the pan guy that starts the software company or the tech or the app in his college dorm room and sells it for $1 billion. That's a great story, and we hear those. But that's not really how most successful businesses are built.
Yep.
Most successful businesses have been being built for 20, 30, 40 years by the time any kind of transition takes place. And so for a lot of owners, they've put in that time. The last thing they want to have happen is for this thing to just disappear. Right. So I would say continuity is very, very important. A lot of people too, kind of going to another thought here, many people, their business is part and parcel with them and their image in the community, their legacy, I'll call it. And so many people, again, many owners want to have that legacy continue. Obviously, another thing that's important frequently, or maybe almost always, is the financial reward.
Yep.
And sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes it's not. You know, maybe someone has built a great business and they've done a great job of accumulating and building wealth outside of that business. That's often not the case, but in some cases it is. And the financial piece may not be as important. But I would say another thing that is tied into financial, but not necessarily, is that even if someone has been very successful creating wealth outside of the business, often they still want to get fair value for that business in the transition. They don't want to just walk away from, I mean, I'm not sure I've ever met anyone that said, I think I'll just give this business to my key employees.
Right.
I'm just going to give it to them.
Yeah.
Okay? They still want to get that fair value. I think another thing that's important is, you know, and I'm helping someone with a succession plan right now. And when I asked him, and he's a construction company owner, when I asked him, what's the most important aspect of this to you? And he thought about it for a minute. We were having lunch, in fact, at a restaurant in Sacramento up your way. And he thought about it for a minute, Eric. And then he looked at me and he said, I want to be able to go to bed on Sunday night and not be worried about what's going to go on in the company that next week.
Okay.
And I thought that was just a great statement.
So let me ask you those 5 things there: continuity, legacy, financial reward, which is kind of tied in with that fair value for the business. Mm-hmm. And then this idea of sort of peace of mind, or especially in construction, because, you know, such a risky business. There's so many issues, you know, it's really challenging. Of those reasons, what are the ones that drive people to make bad decisions about how they set up their succession?
The money part of it.
Okay.
I mean, and isn't that the case in everything we do in life almost? And it's probably, Eric, because, you know, and going back to that guy's statement of being able to go to bed on Sunday night and not have to worry about what's going to go on that next week. When we talk about that, and when you really peel back the layers of that onion, he's talking about complete time freedom, right?
Yeah.
Which in that guy's case, he has not experienced in over 30 years.
Right.
You know, he can take vacations.
Yeah.
I mean, he takes lots of them.
Yep.
But we're talking about complete and total time freedom, and that would be a new experience for him. But you asked a minute ago, which of those probably contribute most to the big mistakes? Probably the money part, because there's so much emotion tied into that.
Okay, so let's explore that. In my experience, often the value that a business owner puts on their business is not realistic. It's usually more than what it actually is in the market.
Right.
How do you help people walk through that process of figuring out what their business is worth and going through that emotional work of understanding that, hey, you know, I've worked on this thing for 40 years, but maybe it isn't worth what I think it is?
Right. You know, the best way to figure out what something's worth is to have a value put on it.
Right.
And fortunately, there are metrics, right, that can be used. I mean, there are specific norms, there are calculations, there are business valuation methods that are standard and for all industries. And the construction industry has some of its own norms. And there are ways to kind of zero in on at least a range. And I think you're right. I think often people may end up finding, hey, that number is a little bit lower than what I was thinking.
Right.
And then sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes they may be surprised that it's a little higher than what they were thinking. But that being said, the real key to this is that it's almost never, no matter what the number is. Let's say the number is $10 million.
Right.
Okay? It almost never, Eric, is going to come in the form of someone writing you a check for $10 million and you putting the $10 million in your bank account the next day and taking off and sailing into the sunset. That's almost never how it works.
Okay,
right?
so that right there is fundamental. And then having said that, with this idea of it's almost never someone just giving me a check, what are the best ways for a construction company to structure a deal, so to speak, so that the company owner or owners maximizes their opportunity to get as much money out of the business as possible?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the interesting answer to that is that in my experience, there isn't really what we would call a best way, a best way for either a construction company or any other kind of company, simply because there are, number one, there are many, many different ways to do it. These transitions can take the form of a sale to a competitor.
Yep.
Which isn't necessarily as a bad thing.
Right.
Could be a much larger company outside of your geographical area that would like to have a footprint in your geographical area. And this can be a great way for them to do it. So it can come in that form. It can come in the form of a sale to a small group of key employees. Mm-hmm. Okay. Each one of these has its own nuances. It can come in the form of a sale to a family member. Right. Who wants to be a part of the business. It can come in the form of a sale to some financial entity. Like
so let me ask you this then. With all those different scenarios, how do I pick the one for me?
So again, that comes back to once you've identified the things that are most important to you, right? Then you have the ability to look at the different types of configurations that are available and make sure that those that you choose or those that you begin to distill down are in alignment with your, we'll call them your core values or your core expectations, right? Okay. The problem that most people have is that they don't get down to thinking about these things until after the financially emotional hook has been set, I'll call it. Anybody's done any fishing, right, and you've had enough of them wiggle off the line, right? I think a lot of times what happens is we get this thing in our mind of, okay, that here's going to be a $10 million check or a $20 million or $5, whatever the number is, doesn't matter. There's going to be this check for this amount of money, and we get that in our mind, and we start planning our future based on all of that. Yeah. And we're too far out there. And then if that emotional hook and then we tell our spouse about it, and they start planning the emotional future, and the ship is sailing. It's way, way, way out of port already. And so how do these things fall apart, or why do such a high percentage of these people end up dissatisfied after the fact? It's because they didn't think through these difficult, but not terribly difficult, but very, very important aspects before the emotional hook was set and before the ship is way out of port. And then it's just what ends up happening, Eric, is they say, doggone, I don't really like the way this looks, but it's too late for me to reel this back in and start over again. So we'll just go with it and we'll figure it out.
Okay, so let's talk through this. First, you have this idea of the emotions, which are very, you have to manage those. And then you have this idea of having started in a particular direction and seeing it not failing and then just kind of muddling through. What are some pieces that I need to really focus on as fundamental parts of the succession plan that are going to increase my likelihood for it being successful?
Well, I think you've got to be realistic about, if we're just looking for a moment at the money part,
right?
You've got to be realistic about how that's likely to come to you.
Okay.
And it's not generally going to come in one big check. And
Okay.
I'll give you one example.
Please do.
A sale to a group of key employees. Let's say you have a president and a controller, and they know that you would like to get off the treadmill. I use that analogy. Okay. They know, because they work closely with you, that you'd like to get off the treadmill in some way, shape, or form. So they come to you with a proposal. Eric, we want to buy the company from you. Okay? We want to buy the business. And we're excited about it. We're ready to run with it. Let's figure it out and make it happen. Okay? And let's say the number is $5 million.
Sure.
Right? What is the likelihood that those two key employees, even if they've been financially responsible, that they have $5 million just kind of sitting around?
Very low.
Very low. I would say the odds are generally
zero.
About round numbers, 0. Okay? I mean, and again, this is just from years and years of experience and having been in these situations. So now what's the alternative? Well, those two guys or gals, okay, they're going to have to go find that money somewhere.
Yep.
And generally then that's going to take the form of them trying to go get a loan from the bank, right? What is the likelihood of those two employees being able to go into a bank, any bank, and borrow $5 million?
Is it around 0?
It's around 0 again. I mean, it's again a very, very low likelihood. Okay, unless somebody has a rich uncle, it does happen. Right. So, and even if they can borrow, let's say that somehow they're able to borrow a substantial portion of it.
Right.
Let's say they're able to borrow half of it. They're able to borrow 2.5. In order for them to borrow 2.5, those two employees, what are they going to have to pledge as security to borrow that? Probably everything they own.
Right.
Their beautiful homes and everything else. Now you have more emotion that enters in, because now you have spouses potentially that have never been used to taking this level of risk.
Right.
It's natural for you as the owner, because you've been taking this kind of risk for 30 years.
And see, that's particularly true when it comes to construction, because I know in talking with my guys over the years is that, they're, like you said, they're used to the risk. They start talking to their employees about buying the company, and it sounds good because they think, oh, now I'm going to make the money that he or she's making. Right. But then when you say, okay, now take this back to your spouse, and when you sign, you're liable and your house is on the line, that changes the dynamic completely.
It's a different, now it's like, oh, wait a minute, maybe, putting myself in the key employee's shoes, maybe I need to think this over a little bit more and with my spouse and I, and so then it gets even more complicated. But let's take it to the next level. Let's say they were able to clear those hurdles, right? And they get the 2.5, and then they come back to you and they say, Eric, we've got half.
Right.
So what we'd like to do, we've talked to the accountant, right, that works with the business. We've had a meeting with that person, and they've suggested that this is done all the time, and we'd like to propose that you carry a note for 2.5, and we'll give you a good interest rate, and we'll make those payments, and, the business is going great. You know it, we know it, and so on, okay? What's the term of that note going to be? Forget about the interest rate. What's the length of that note typically going to be?
I don't know, 10 years? 10
years, okay. And what I would tell you is that in economic terms, 10 years is a long time.
Yes, it is.
In my life, when I think about my life and my relationship with my family and my kids, time goes by like that, okay?
Right.
10 years flies by. But in economic terms, meaning what's the average economic cycle in this country? 5 years? 6 years? So you agree to a 10-year deal, you basically have automatically agreed to something that's going to have a hiccup somewhere in between year 1 and year 10.
So let's just highlight that. That's a key thought, because there is a difference between real time and economic time.
Yeah.
And like you say, real time passes extremely quickly, but economic time passes slowly and has many ups and downs and unknowns.
No one called COVID. Okay?
Yep. Nobody did.
If they did, they're probably like in a straitjacket somewhere or something, and they wrote a manifesto about it. But no one forecast that. No one called that. And so, but there's always something, right?
Yep.
I mean, there's always some type of interruption. There's always some type of a force. Nothing continues successfully unabated forever. So a 10-year time frame, there's going to be a hiccup in there. And when that hiccup occurs, your two guys are going to come back to you, Eric, somewhat sheepishly, and they're going to say, hey, as you know, this and that is going on in the economy, and maybe it's localized, maybe it's industry focused, maybe it's global. It's not going to matter, because they're going to come back to you with that note in hand, and they're going to say, can we find a way to restructure this? Can we find a way to forego some payments? And that's going to happen. And so back to my guy who says, I just want to go to sleep on Sunday night.
Yep.
Okay. He just signed up for 10 more years of, Nitol or whatever you call it on Sunday nights to get us to sleep. The point is, look at those things ahead of time, before the emotional ship has sailed.
Yes.
Let's look at these things ahead of time and go through these variables and these what ifs and say, okay, what can be done to configure this differently?
Okay, so let's talk about that then. That scenario is, you get the owners, they're looking at the people in the business, and, you might have your employees come to you and say, hey, can we buy it from you? But a lot of times the owners are thinking, well, maybe it can be my COO or my controller or something like that. What can I do in terms of beginning to think through those issues and position myself to be part of the 50% of the people who are satisfied with the transition as opposed to dissatisfied?
Yeah. So I would say, as I've kind of beat this key of the piano to death, but number one, get that vision absolutely dialed in.
Right.
Which of the aspects, those 5 items that we discussed earlier, which of those are most important to me?
Right.
I mean, another one that comes to mind is I may want to figure out a way to protect long-term employees that have been with me for a long time.
Right.
We see this happen where someone, I don't want to get off track. We can talk about that later, but a sale takes place and, everyone's job security is protected supposedly, and it's all promised. And then the next thing you know, it's all moved to another country or whatever.
Yeah, no, I get it.
So that can be very dissatisfying as well. But back to this, number one, figure out that very, very clear vision.
Right.
Okay? And then I would say, number 2, just have an understanding of the fact that it's probably not going to be one big check at one time.
Very good.
The fact that it's going to be different from that doesn't have to be bad. It's only bad if you didn't understand that up front. Okay.
Yep.
And then the third part that generally does not need to be explained to anyone is that the tax man is going to take a big chunk out of that check, no matter what form it comes in.
Yep.
A good piece of this is going to go to taxes. And there are the good news to that. I mean, the silver lining around that tax cloud is that there are substantial, significant things that can be done to mitigate that tax bite, but they have to be done before the fact. They can't be done after the fact.
So there's this big element of time and vision and managing your emotions. All of those things are you have to be doing all of those if you have any hope at this successful succession plan.
Absolutely.
How should a company owner begin this process? And when I say how, let me rephrase that. When should a company owner begin the process?
I would say much sooner rather than later.
Okay, so time frame.
Sure, I'll give you another quick example.
Please do, yeah.
I met a fellow who had a very, very successful business, not a construction company, but
Right.
a really neat business that he and his wife had built over a long period of time. He was in his 70s by this point in time.
Uh-huh.
We met out on the golf course. He was actually quite a good golfer, and I'm not. So once we got past that, we started having some conversation, and I got a little better feel for what he did for a living. He got a better feel for what I do. We had a conversation. And his comment to me was, Dan, if you could figure out a way for me to make this happen, I'd love to transition, sooner rather than later. So we talked a lot. We did a lot of upfront dialogue and planning over a course of a few months. And then we figured out a way that we thought could be beneficial to him. Now, in his case, we got it down to kind of the brass tacks, and then he decided to just pull back and take another look at it.
Okay. Why did he do that?
He didn't like the price. He thought the price was too low.
For the price that the price of the business.
Mm-hmm. What ended up happening in his case is we found another company that was complementary to his.
Right.
That essentially wanted to do a merger. They were larger. They were a larger company in a completely different geographical market. So they were unknown to each other. But that larger company wanted to come in, purchase his company. His company was complementary to theirs on a national scale. And it was the proverbial marriage made in heaven, but the number was too low for him.
Okay.
He was like the person you mentioned earlier in the call or in the conversation that they think the company's worth more than it really is.
So let me just interrupt you there. When you're saying that, I get this idea, the word ego comes to mind. Because again, I've invested so much into this business. I know how awesome this business is. It's a reflection of me. And so I've got my ego tied up into that. How can I work through that ego piece so that I'm realistic about what my business is worth? Give me some thoughts on that, particularly with this gentleman, if it's applicable.
Well, I think if we could go back in time, I want to finish the story, and then I'm going to come back and answer your question.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Because this is meaningful to the time element. This gentleman, as I mentioned, pulled back because he felt the price was too low. Was there ego involved? Absolutely. Great guy.
Sure.
Just exactly what you described, though. He'd been building this company for years and years and years. He knew what it paid him in cash flow and lifestyle. He thought it was worth more, from an upfront price than these other people were willing to offer. He decided to put the brakes on, and 3 months later, Eric, he had a stroke. And what happens in a closely held company when the key guy, when the boss, when the big cheese goes down? What happens? The best performers, the top people in the company, start looking for other opportunities. They get scared. They get scared about what's going to happen to this, because most of these companies don't have a succession plan in place. It's not identifiable. It's not in writing. It's not communicated. And so that is exactly what happened in this gentleman's case. The key employees started running for the doors, and the business started to kind of implode. So something that he felt was worth more than these others were willing to offer, actually not long after ended up being worth a lot less, because the business started to unravel due to his health problem. And he came out of that, and they survived, but it's a different company now than it was when they were introduced to this other buyer. So what could we maybe have done differently in answer to your question? And I'll make myself as part of the blame of this, because we were a team, right? What could we have done differently? Maybe before we entertained the offer from this other group, we could have done a better job at authenticating some valuation for this person. And this was a number of years ago. I would say we probably were still learning ourselves as to how best to facilitate in this type of thing. But what I would do differently with that gentleman, if we were doing it over again, is he and I would have spent more time up front figuring out what was most important to him in this whole transition, number one, and number two, the money part. What would it really look like? And let's get some authenticated numbers from different sources. That way, when this other group comes in and makes an offer, we have a better idea of what we're looking at and how that matches up.
You know, it's so interesting there because a lot of the decisions that we make are based on a narrative that we have in our minds, a story that we're telling ourselves. And like you said earlier on with the financial discussion about how financial time has all these ups and downs, our lives have those ups and downs. And so this gentleman, he wasn't planning on having a stroke.
No.
But that, and so it's interesting to think about how, on the one hand, you have to be able to think through the worst case scenarios when you're going through the succession plan so that you don't get blindsided by something that's out of your control and get all that value taken out of your company.
Yep. And I think that's one of the key maybe advantages to working with an advisor or an advisory team that has been down this road before. You know, it's kind of like when I drive to the office, I drive virtually the same route every single time.
Right.
I know sometimes I drive it a little faster than I should, but I know where every bend in the road is and every pothole and every detour and everything that might come up because I've done it over and over and over again. The same thing holds true with this kind of planning. You want to be working with someone, bring together a team that has this kind of experience so they know even the right questions to ask.
See, that's very good there. Okay, so tell me in your view with succession planning, who are the team members that a business owner should bring together in order to maximize their opportunity for success?
I think number one, if they're married, their spouse needs to be involved.
Okay.
Because there is just, and even if that involvement is peripheral, okay? I've been involved in situations, in planning situations where I've never really even met the spouse, or maybe just met briefly, but we've talked enough and I know enough about them. And I can tell from the other details coming out of different conversations that they've had involvement, even if it's just peripheral. But I would say the spouse, if they're married, needs to be part of that group. Their accountant, their CPA is always going to be part of that group. And then obviously the owner. I think someone like me that has that background, it could be, they may have an advisor already that has that experience. But I would say the cautionary note here is that for many people, for many advisors, it may be their first time through.
Yeah.
And so that's where you can get tripped up as well.
Yep.
If it's somebody's first time through, if it's their chance at the big time to help this great business owner finally plan their succession, there will likely be some opportunities missed.
And the kind of planning that you guys do is around which areas?
It's really around probably the tying together the emotional and the economic aspects of it.
Okay.
To maximize the potential.
Excellent.
So we don't practice accounting.
Right.
So the accountants practice accounting. We don't practice law, but we know who the top people are in those fields and the other specialty areas, whether it be other aspects of finance or insurance or, like I said, the legal side. If it's another more complex type transaction, like an ESOP, for example, which may or may not be as applicable to construction companies, but I've seen them done and very, very successfully. Many, many ways. You know, that's the challenging part of it. There are many, many ways to structure these successfully. And it's just a matter of spending the time and analyzing the various alternatives and bringing it down to where it's like a suit of clothes for that person. And, you know, you get it to where it fits just right.
Excellent. So let's say I've started on a succession process. Maybe I've gone down the path with an advisor or a team, and I'm at the point where I'm just frustrated. It's not going the way that I hoped it would go. I still have a time frame, maybe 5-10 years left in the business, so it's not the end of the world. But what do I need to do to get things back on track?
I would say it's a little bit like the submarine, right? That has, and I've actually have been on a submarine once, now that I think of it. But I'm going to say I've seen them in the movies, probably seen them more in the movies, but they have those chambers, you know, that seal up, right? and one at a time. And so if you're down the road and you're in a chamber that's taking on water,
yeah.
you've got to go back to just go back to the prior chamber and keep going back to where it feels right.
Okay.
Okay. So that's just another way of looking at it. I would say just
That's interesting.
seal the doors off and keep going back to where it feels right again. And that may be all the way back to the beginning, depending. But you just go back to where it feels right again and say, okay, now this is still important to me. And how are we going to do it?
Right. And so that begins again, like you said earlier, with that idea of the vision, the idea of the realistic idea that it's not going to be one big check, that you're going to have these tax implications. You've got talent implications. You know, if you're going to do internally, are these people really up for the risk? Are they really up for the challenge? If you're going to do it externally, do I have the right valuation? Do I have the right buyers in place? Are they available? All those kinds of things.
You just brought up a great point, Eric, and one that I had kind of overlooked, and that is, but it's almost always there. My question to you would be, as you've talked to company owners about succession, how often do you find an owner that feels he or she have the right talent pool completely in place already to take the reins and run with the company? How often does that happen?
Yeah, it's pretty rare, because what happens is that there's so much hope, there's so much hope. And you have to be just stone cold realistic. And I think you have to look at your construction company like a sports franchise, where like in the NFL, if you're not performing, you're not going to be on the team. And what I mean by that is that you have to think through, I draft someone or I identify someone as a potential candidate to take over. I evaluate them. And then if they're not the candidates, I have to tell myself the truth and then make sure that I have either other people concurrently identified or that I move on and think about the right people who can take over from me.
Yep. And, and I like that analogy. I love that analogy. And what's interesting, Eric, is as I think back over the years, I'm thinking about one person in particular, and it happened to be a construction company, and a good sized company, 200 to 300 million of revenue, 200 to 300 employees.
Yep.
And that person, that owner, felt like he had the team in place to make it work and to make it run. And he had groomed and nurtured that team, and they were all ready to go. But do you know how long he had been? By the time he got around to doing this, he was well into his 70s.
Yep.
He had had a couple of health problems. And what was interesting is the day he revealed to his team the succession plan that was being put in place, and this happened maybe about 3 years ago now.
Yep.
The day he revealed that in the conference room to his key people, men and women, probably 7, 8, 9 of them in that group, there were tears shed. There were hugs and well wishes, because these people had worked for years being very highly compensated in a very successful company, but they had worked for years without any knowledge of any succession plan at all being in place. And under the fear of that owner getting older and older and older, and them wondering if something happens to him, what on earth is going to happen to this company? They were so relieved to hear and to see the great reveal of this plan take place. They literally cried.
So that makes me think of a question. When should I be unveiling this succession plan? I mean, that seems a little late in the game. Shouldn't I be unveiling it earlier? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's going to be very much a personal decision.
Okay.
That particular owner was adamant about the fact that the core group, it was my firm and the specialists that I brought in to help facilitate it. Okay. And it was his controller, his CPAs, and him. That was the group. And we were all basically sworn to secrecy, which is, it's confidentiality. It's the way we work.
Yep.
And the meetings were all held in private, and there was no discussion of it until it was all figured out. Knowing that individual and the kind of person that he is, he's a very exacting person. And I think he just did not, two things. I know he didn't want there to be any discussion of this going on behind the scenes amongst the company employees and it being a disruption. He didn't want that to happen. But I think knowing him as a person, as I've gotten to know him, he's also a very exacting individual. And he didn't want to roll it out until he knew he had it right.
Okay, that's fair enough.
We worked on it. We worked on it for several years. I mean, I can tell you, in that you ask about the timing, when should you start? In his case, we got the ball rolling and then a recession hit. And so he kind of felt compelled to put everything on hold. And it took a few years then to work through that recession. And then we were able to pick the ball up again and start running with it.
So there's some wisdom there then in not necessarily revealing it because of the unknowns that may affect the plan.
Right.
Okay, so as we wrap up here, Dan, just give us three, you may be repeating yourself here, but that's okay. Give us 3 action items that a construction company owner or group of owners needs to be taking in order to get their succession planning off on the right foot.
Okay, I would say number 1, set aside some quiet time and have a very, very meaningful question with someone that has been down this road.
Yep.
Okay? I mean, it could be a colleague with another company that's gone through transition, but have a meaning, or an advisor, have a meaningful conversation in a quiet place at a quiet time and figure out what you want to have happen as a result of this. You know, A great question to ask would be, if we were looking at this again 3 years from now,
yes,
what would have to have happened between now and then for me to feel really good about this, so that I'm not one of the 50% that after the fact are dissatisfied with the way it went.
It's very good. Okay? Excellent.
I would say it's that. And then we already talked about, understand that the check probably won't be, just understand that the money can come in different configurations.
Yes.
And then the third part, understand too, that the tax element, there are ways to address that. You don't have to just throw in the towel. You don't have to lose 40% of the purchase price to state and federal taxes. There are ways to work through that, but that has to be addressed up front.
Excellent. Dan, you've been very, very generous with your time. How can people get a hold of you?
Oh, and it's been a real pleasure. I always enjoy our conversations. Best way probably to get a hold of me is to go to our company website, www.topturncapital.com. Mm-hmm. We're headquartered over in Monterey. If you enjoy golf, I won't pretend to be able to play as well or anywhere near as well as you do. But look me up. Be happy to take you out and show you around.
There you go.
In addition to that, our phone number, area code 831-324-0481. Just call our office and we can connect that way as well.
Excellent. And you also have a book coming out called The Succession Breakthrough. It's not quite out yet, but you anticipate it in the next, I know we're recording this in October of 2020.
Yeah, it's coming up. It's been a really, really long process, but it's a great book. It's a little bit of a family endeavor, and we've taken our time putting it together, but I think it'll be helpful. And of course, I should add that a highlight of the book is Chapter 7, which is an interview with the construction genius, Eric Anderson. And it's a great, great chapter. So we're in the final stages of the book. It's just about finished. We'll be releasing some information on the release of that on the website as well. I think all there is now is a placeholder saying it's coming.
That's terrific. Terrific. Well, Dan, I'll make sure that we have links in the show notes to your website. And then once the book comes out and with a link, feel free to share that with me, and I'll put that in the show notes as well.
That'll be great. Appreciate it. And it's been great being with you this morning.
Thanks, Dan.
All right.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity, and to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.